Hey guys, it's Miss Bonanno. It is the first day of our attempt to slow down the spread of coronavirus. Sometimes when we have to spend a little bit more time indoors or alone, we tend to get in our heads a little bit. So I like to counteract that by keeping myself busy. And one of the ways that I like to keep myself busy is by reading. So, in case you are the same as me and you need a distraction, I'm going to be reading My Grandmother Asked Me to Tell You She's Sorry by Frederick Backman. It's a book I got a while ago. This author and this book have been recommended to me a lot, but sometimes it takes a while for me to get into a new book. So, here we go. Elsa is 7 years old and different. Her grandmother is 77 years old and crazy, as in standing on the balcony firing paintball guns at strangers crazy. She is also Elsa's best and only friend. At night, Elsa takes refuge in her grandmother's stories, in the land of the almost awake, and the kingdom of Miamis, where everybody is different and nobody needs to be normal. When Elsa's grandmother dies and leaves behind a series of letters apologizing to people she has wronged, Elsa's greatest adventure begins. Her grandmother's instructions lead her to an apartment building full of misfits, monsters, attack dogs, and old crones, but also to the truth about fairy tales and kingdoms and a grandmother like no other. My Grandmother Asked Me to Tell You She's Sorry is told with the same comic accuracy and beating heart as Frederick Backman's best-selling debut novel, A Man Called Ove. It is a story about life and death and one of the most important human rights, the right to be different. Chapter 1. Tobacco. Every 7-year-old deserves a superhero. That's just how it is. Anyone who doesn't agree needs their head examined. That's what Elsa's granny says, at least. Elsa is 7, going on 8. She knows she isn't especially good at being 7. She knows she's different. Her headmaster says she needs to fall into line in order to achieve a better fit with her peers. Other adults describe her as very grown up for her age. Elsa knows this is just another way of saying massively annoying for her age, because they only tend to say this when she corrects them for mispronouncing déjà vu, or not being able to tell the difference between me and I at the end of a sentence. Smartasses usually can't, hence the grown-up for her age comment, generally said with a strained smile at her parents, as if she has a mental impairment, as if Elsa has shown them up by not being totally thick just because she's 7. And that's why she doesn't have any friends except Granny, because all the other 7-year-olds in her school are as idiotic as 7-year-olds tend to be. But Elsa is different. She shouldn't take any notice of what those Muppets think, says Granny, because all the best people are different. Look at superheroes. After all, if superpowers were normal, everyone would have them. Granny is 77 years old, going on 78. She's not very good at it either. You can tell she's old because her face looks like a newspaper stuffed into wet shoes, but no one ever accuses Granny of being grown up for her age. Perky people sometimes say to Elsa's mom, looking either fairly worried or fairly angry as Mom sighs, and asks how much she owes for the damages. Or when Granny's smoking at the hospital sets the fire alarm off, and she starts ranting and raving about how everything has to be so bloody politically correct these days. When the security guards make her extinguish her cigarette. Or that time she made a snowman in Britt Marie and Kent's garden right under their balcony and dressed it up in grown-up clothes so it looked as if a person had fallen from the roof. Or that time those prim men wearing spectacles started ringing out all the doorbells and wanted to talk about God and Jesus and heaven, and Granny stood on her balcony with dressing gown flapping, shooting at them with her paintball gun. And Britt Marie couldn't quite decide if she was the most annoyed about the paintball gun thing or the not wearing any underwear under the dressing gown thing. But she reported both to the police just to be on the safe side. Those are the times, Elsa supposes, that people find Granny perky for her age. They also say Granny is mad, but in actual fact, she's a genius. It's just that she's a bit of a crackpot at the same time. She used to be a doctor, and she won prizes, and journalists wrote articles about her, and she went to all the most terrible places in the world when everyone else was getting out. She saved lives and fought evil everywhere on Earth, as superheroes do. But one day, someone decided she was too old to save lives, even if Elsa quite strongly suspects what they really meant by too old was too crazy. Granny refers to this person as society, and says it's only because everything has to be so bloody politically correct nowadays that she's no longer allowed to make incisions in people. and that it was really mainly about society getting so bleeding fussy about the smoking ban in the operating theaters, and who could work under those sorts of conditions. So now she's mainly at home, driving Britt Marie and Mom around the bend. Britt Marie is Granny's neighbor. Mom is Elsa's mom. And really, Britt Marie is also Elsa's mom's neighbor because Elsa's mom lives next door to Elsa's granny. And Elsa obviously also lives next door to Granny because Elsa lives with her mom. Except every other weekend when she lives with Dad and Lizette. Of course, George is also Granny's neighbor because he lives with Mom. It's a bit all over the place. But anyway, to get back to the point, life-saving and driving people nuts are Granny's superpowers, which perhaps makes her a bit of a dysfunctional superhero. Elsa knows this because she looked up dysfunctional on Wikipedia. People of Granny's age describe Wikipedia as an encyclopedia, but on the net. Encyclopedias are what Elsa describes as Wikipedia, but analog. Elsa has checked dysfunctional in both places, and it means that something is not quite functioning as it's supposed to, which is one of Elsa's favorite things about her granny. But maybe not today, because it's 1:30 in the morning, and Elsa is fairly tired and would really like to go back to bed, except that's not going to happen, because Granny's been throwing turds at a policeman. It's a little complicated. Elsa looks around the little rectangular room and yawns listlessly and so widely that she looks like she's trying to swallow her own head. "I did tell you not to climb the fence," she mutters, checking her watch. Granny doesn't answer. Elsa takes off her Gryffindor scarf and puts it in her lap. She was born on Boxing Day 7 years ago, almost 8. The same day, the German scientists recorded the strongest ever emission of gamma radiation from a magnetar over Earth. Admittedly, Elsa doesn't know what a magnetar is, but it's some kind of neutron star. And it sounds a little like Megatron, which is the name of an evil one in Transformers, which is what simpletons who don't read enough quality literature call a children's program. In actual fact, the Transformers are robots, but if you look at it academically, they could also be counted as superheroes. Elsa is very keen on both Transformers and neutron stars, and she imagines that an emission of gamma radiation would look a bit like that time Granny spilled Fanta on Elsa's iPhone and tried to dry it out in the toaster. And Granny says it makes Elsa special to have been born on a day like that, and being special is the best way of being different. Granny is busy distributing small heaps of tobacco all over the wooden table in front of her and rolling them into rustling cigarette papers. "I said I told you not to climb the fence." Granny makes a snorting sound and searches the pockets of her much too large overcoat for a lighter. She doesn't seem to be taking any of this very seriously, mainly because she never seems to take anything seriously, except when she wants to smoke and can't find a lighter. "It was a tiny little fence, for God's sake," she says breezily. "It's nothing to get worked up about. My grandma—" Oh, sorry. "Don't you, for God's sake, me. You're the one who threw shit at the police. Stop fussing. You sound like your mother. Do you have a lighter? I'm 7. How long are you going to use that as an excuse? Until I'm not 7 anymore." Granny mumbles something that sounds like, "Not a crime to ask, is it?" and continues rifling through her pockets. "I don't think you can smoke in here, actually," Elsa informs her, sounding calmer now and fingering the long rip in the Gryffindor scarf. "Of course you can smoke. We'll just open a window." Elsa looks skeptically at the windows. "I don't think they're the sort of windows that open." "Why not? They've got bars on them." Granny glares with dissatisfaction at the windows and then at Elsa. "So now you can't even smoke at the police station? Jesus, it's like being in 1984. Elsa yawns again. "Can I borrow your phone?" "What for? To check something. Where? Online." "You invest too much time on that internet stuff." "You mean spend." "I beg your pardon?" "What I mean is, you don't invest in that way. You wouldn't go around saying, 'I invested 2 hours in reading Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone,' would you?" Granny just rolls her eyes and hands her the phone. Did you ever hear about the girl who blew up because she did too much thinking?" The policeman, who shuffles into the room, looks very, very tired. "I want to call my lawyer," Granny demands at once. "I want to call my mom," Elsa demands at once. "In that case, I want to call my lawyer first," Granny insists. The policeman sits down opposite them and fidgets with a little pile of papers. "Your mother is on her way," he says to Elsa with a sigh. Granny makes a sort of dramatic gasp that only Granny knows how to do. "Why did you call her? Are you mad?" she protests, as if the policeman just told her he was going to leave Elsa in the forest to be raised by a pack of wolves. "She'll be bloody livid." "We have to call the child's legal guardian," the policeman explains calmly. I am also the child's legal guardian. I am the child's grandmother." Granny fumes, rising slightly out of her chair and shaking her unlit cigarette menacingly. It's 1:30 in the morning. Someone has to take care of the child. Yes, me. I'm taking care of the child, she splutters. The policeman makes a fairly strained attempt to gesture amicably across the interrogation room. And how do you feel it's going so far? Granny looks slightly offended. Well, everything was going just fine until you started chasing me. You broke into a zoo. It was a tiny little fence. There's no such thing as a tiny burglary. Granny shrugs and makes a brushing movement over the table as if she thinks they've stretched this out long enough. The policeman notices the cigarette and eyes dubiously. Oh, come on. I can smoke in here, can't I? He shakes his head sternly. Granny leans forward, looks him deep in the eyes, and smiles. Can't you make an exception? Not even for little old me? Elsa gives Granny a little shove on the side and switches their secret language. Because Granny and Elsa have a secret language, us all grannies must have with their grandchildren. Because by law, that's a requirement, says Granny. Or at least it should be. Drop it, Granny. It's like illegal to flirt with a policeman. Says who? Well, the police for starters, Elsa replies. The police are supposed to be there for the sake of the citizens, Granny hisses. I paid my taxes, you know. The policeman looks at them, as you do when a 7-year-old and a 77-year-old start arguing in a secret language in a police station in the middle of the night. Then Granny's eyelashes tremble alluringly at him, as she once again points pleadingly at her cigarette. But when he shakes his head, Granny leans back in the chair and exclaims in a normal language, I mean, this political correctness, it's worse than our apartheid for smokers in this bloody country nowadays. How do you spell that? Asks Elsa. What? Granny sighs, as you do when precisely the whole world is against you, even though you pay your taxes. That apartheid thing, says Elsa. Appartheid, Granny spells. Elsa immediately Googles it on Granny's phone. It takes her a few attempts. Granny's always been a terrible speller. Meanwhile, the policeman explains that they've decided to let them go, but Granny will be called at a later date to explain the burglary and the other aggravations. What aggravations? Driving illegally to begin with. What do you mean illegally? That's my car. I don't need permission to drive my own car, do I? No, replies the policeman patiently, but you need a driver's license. Granny throws out her arms in exasperation. She just launched into another rant about this being a Big Brother society when Elsa whacks the phone sharply against the table. It's got nothing to do with that apartheid thing. You compare not being able to smoke with apartheid, and it's not the same thing at all. It's not even close. Granny waves her head resignedly. I meant it was, more or less like that. It isn't at all. It was a metaphor, for God's sake. A bloody crap metaphor. How would you know? Wikipedia. Granny turns in defeat to the policeman. Do your children carry on like this? The policeman looks uncomfortable. We don't let the children surf the net unsupervised. Granny stretches out her arms towards Elsa, a gesture that seems to say, you see? Elsa just shakes her head and crosses her arms very hard. Granny, just say sorry for throwing turds at the police, and we can go home. She snorts in the secret language, though still very expressly upset about that whole apartheid thing. Sorry, says Granny in the secret language. To the police, not me, you muppet. There'll be no apologizing to fascists here. I pay my taxes, and you're the muppet, Granny sulks. Takes one to know one. Then they both sit with their arms crossed, demonstratively looking away from each other until Granny nods at the policeman and says in a normal language, would you be kind enough to let my spoiled granddaughter know that if she takes this attitude, she's quite welcome to walk home? Tell her I'm going home with Mom, and she's the one who can walk, Elsa replies at once. Tell her she can... The policeman stands up without a word, walks out of the room, and closes the door behind him, as if intending to go into another room and bury his head in a large, soft cushion and yell as loud as he can. Now look what you did, says Granny. Look what you did. Eventually, a heavy-set policewoman with piercing green eyes comes in instead. It doesn't seem to be the first time she's run into Granny, because she smiles in that tired way so typical of people who know Granny and says, you have to stop doing this. We also have real criminals to worry about. Granny just mumbles, why don't you stop yourselves? And then they're allowed to go home. Standing on the pavement waiting for her mother, Elsa fingers the rip in her scarf. It goes right through the Gryffindor emblem. She tries as hard as she can not to cry, but doesn't make much of a success of it. Oh, come on, your mom can mend that, says Granny, trying to be cheerful, giving her a little punch on the shoulder. Elsa looks up anxiously. And we could tell your mom the scarf got torn when you were trying to stop me climbing the fence to get to the monkeys. Elsa nods and runs her fingers over the scarf again. It didn't get torn when Granny was climbing the fence. It got torn at school when 3 older girls who hate Elsa, without Elsa really understanding why, got a hold of her outside the cafeteria and hit her and tore her scarf and threw it down the toilet. Their jeers are still echoing in Elsa's head. Granny notices the look in her eyes and leans forward before whispering in the secret language. One day we'll take those losers at your school to Miamis and throw them to the lions. Elsa dries her eyes with the back of her hand and smiles faintly. I'm not stupid, Granny, she whispers. I know you did all that stuff tonight to make me forget about what happened at school. Granny kicks at some gravel and clears her throat. I didn't want you to remember this day because of the scarf. So I thought instead you could remember it as the day your granny broke into a zoo. And escaped from a hospital, Elsa said with a grin. And escaped from a hospital, says Granny with a grin. And threw turds at the police. Actually, it was soil. Or mainly soil, anyway. Changing memories is a good superpower, I suppose. Granny shrugs. If you can't get rid of the bad, you have to top it up with more goody stuff. That's not a word. I know. Thanks, Granny, says Elsa, and leans her head against her arm. And then Granny just nods and whispers, We're knights of the kingdom of Miamis. We have to do our duty. Because all 7-year-olds deserve superheroes, and anyone who doesn't agree needs their head examined. Good start so far, guys. Hope you enjoyed, and we'll regather for chapter 2. Take care.